Welcome to Module 4, Evaluating a Company's Resources, Capabilities, and Competitiveness. The reminder for this week, in addition to your two discussion boards, is that the team leaders for the teams you've been assigned to for assignment number 2 for the mini case study, by Sunday night, September 27th, you need to sign up for and please provide 3 choices for your presentation night. So make sure you engage in a conversation with your classmates. What night is best? I've offered 9 presentation slots. We'll probably only need to use 5 or 6 depending on how many teams sort out this term. And what I've tried to do is to do 3 presentations a night, because your discussion board 12, you can earn the discussion points that week one of 2 ways. The first is if your team goes at 6:15 p.m. on Tuesday, October 3rd, then you could stay online that evening and listen to the presentations at 7 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. By just being in, collaborate with us, being there, asking some questions, you'll earn your points. If you decide not to stay, then you need to go back before the end of the week into Collaborate, where all the presentations will be recorded, and listen to 2 presentations and complete a peer review evaluation, some questions on the 2 other teams that you evaluated. And I want to remind you again that when we're in an online environment, you would come to class that evening. We'd watch all the presentations in class class would be held for 3 hours, but you only need to watch 2 presentations and do your own presentation that week. So I'm going to do my best to accommodate your choices, first come, first serve, and I'm going to need a little flexibility. Like if someone picks a 6:15 on Wednesday night and I've got a team at 7:45, I might move one of the teams to either 7, so that we don't have a 45-minute open spot. So this is a virtual environment. I'll do my best to be flexible, and you do your best to show up and engage. So this week, we're talking about evaluating a company's internal environment. And just like chapter 3, chapter 4 is a little bit lengthy because there's a lot of tools and concepts to learn to evaluate the company's internal environment, its resources, its capabilities, its relative cost position, value change, and then to look at it as compared to its rivals. So the entire chapter is actually designed around 6 questions. Actually, I have 7 listed here because I split out a question. But the very first question is, how well is the company's present strategy working? In evaluating how well a company's present strategy is working, a manager has to start with what the strategy is. Now, be mindful that chapter 5 is about the 5 generic strategies, so you will read about that next. And sometimes it's an adaptation of those 5 generic strategies, but what you're doing here is by assessing the strengths and weaknesses of the organization and its competitive assessment, you can get an idea if it's a cost leader, or if it's differentiation, if it's focused, if it's broad, and so on and so forth. So the first thing to do here is to look at the competitive strengths of the organization. So that's question 1. And one of the discussion board exercises for this week is to calculate some financial ratios and understanding what they mean. So take time to read the chapter to understand these key ratios. And in addition to running key ratios, when you're doing a financial assessment of an organization, you should also look at the past 5 years profit and loss statements, and you can do a common size statement, and you're going to need to go back to your finance book to see what a common size statement is. But what you're basically doing is looking at the past 5 years financial strength to see how key areas as revenue, cost of goods sold, net profit margins, operating expenses, variable, fixed cost, net profit, and trying to see the trend based on the profit and loss statements. You also want to look at the cash flow statements of the last 5 years to see the strength or weaknesses in the cash flow and the balance sheet. This week in the discussion board, you're going to look at Costco. The statements are right there in your textbook at the end of the chapter. You're not going to calculate all 25 ratios. You're going to calculate about a dozen of the ratios and be able to step back and be able to give an idea of what do you think the financial performance is of Costco. And so what I'm asking you to do is to calculate these ratios and attach in either a Word or Excel file to your posting your ratios that you did that's listed in the back of the textbook there or the chapter. And in the message box, all I want you to do is to write an overall paragraph based on the ratios that you looked at and looking at the P&L and L and the statements there. What is your overall feeling of Costco's performance? So in the message box, you're just going to write a paragraph and then you're going to summarize your ratios. So I actually gave you the answers to the first two ratios, but in the message box, you'd write gross profit margin and see how I laid it out in the discussion board. The other question is, I'd like you to reflect back on your finance class and what other types of financial analysis would be helpful beyond these ratios that the textbook asked you to calculate on. And then finally, kind of a fun question, what is your opinion about Costco, assuming you have shopped there? So you are going to practice a little bit of financial analysis for the strategic assignment, the mini case application too on the Lawrence Tech College of Management. I'm not going to give you any financial data, but when you're doing your final case studies, you will be required to do some financial analysis. And this is also really important. A capability for yourself in the MBA program is to really understand the financial health of your organization or your department in your division and be able to remember these key ratios. And some of them will show up on the ETS testing, which will be in a couple of weeks. So that's the second question. Now, the other discussion board question is VRIN, and that's taking the VRIN application, and VRIN stands for the advantages is your strengths, valuable is your capabilities, rare, inimitable, or non-substitutable. So this week's other discussion question requires you to hopefully have visited a Panera Bread, a Dunkin' Donuts, maybe a Tim Hortons or a Starbucks. And if you go to the Blackboard discussion area, it's how many of these four tests, which is valuable, rare, imitable, and non-substitutable, does the organization possess? So at first I was just going to have you do Panera Bread, but then I threw in a couple other options. Now, if you've never gone to any four of these organizations, I recommend you do get there this week. Or you can, in your textbook, there's actually a case study in Panera, so you could skim the case study and be able to answer this question by giving, again, this is your opinion, and you'll be posted. So this requires some experiential learning where you've gone out and visited these places, or you can jump to the back of the textbook. So those are your two discussion board questions this week that we're going to engage in. And then the third question for evaluating a company's internal resources is being able to say, what is the company's competitive advantage over the rivals? And in doing that, you're really beginning to put together what I would call um, a SWOT analysis. And so the textbook, the SWOT analysis has been here since the 1950s. The textbook does a wonderful job explaining the importance of strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and how you look at these, how you make interpretation from these, and how it is involved in strategy. So the SWOT analysis is a very simple tool. It's a powerful tool for sizing up a company's resources and capabilities. And you're going to want to look at the strengths and weaknesses as it relates to manufacturing, product, HR, marketing, and customer service. So there's really good examples in the book to help you there. I also bring in some part of my own work, which is SOAR. And SOAR is a profoundly positive way of strategic thinking, planning, and leading that would ask you that when you're creating strategy, that you look for a very whole systems approach and that you bring in other stakeholders besides senior leadership and the board, but you bring in other employees of the organization, maybe even suppliers and customers. So this is extra material above and beyond your textbook. And if you want a copy of the Thin Book of SOAR, just email me your postal address and I will put a copy of the Thin Book of SOAR in the postal, in the old-fashioned U.S. mail for you. So I will do that free. And what SOAR is telling you is that when it comes to designing strategy, you really leverage your strengths and your market opportunities to come up with a real viable competitive advantage. The fourth question in here is, how does a company's value chain activities impact its cost structure and customer value propositions? You know, one of the most telling signs of whether a company's business position is strong or weak is whether its price and cost are competitive within the industry rivals, but it's also as, what's that value proposition that you're providing that no one else is providing, or that you're providing better than anybody else. So the company's value chain identifies the primary activities that create customer value and the related supported activities. If these activities are not a competitive advantage, and if they're not creating customer value, do you really need these activities? So a customer's value chain does need to be assessed. The next question, question 5, is is the company's competitively stronger or weaker than key rivals? The textbook puts together the steps to develop a competitive strength analysis. And it gives you an example of how to make a list of the industry key success factors and measure it against your competition. Now I want to remind you, or make you mindful that step 2 is assigning weights to each of the measures based upon perceived importance. So the key here is, I might assign one set of weights, and let's say I'm the marketing director, and then the finance person may assess a different kind of weights, and then the customer service person or the CEO. So you want to make sure that when you're assigning these weights, that it's kind of a collaborative effort and a collaborative discussion, so that the weights are not biased, because there's some subjectivity to what they're asking you to do here. And then the question that comes out of this is the company's competitively stronger or weaker than the key rivals? And that's what you have to keep assessing yourself, is, how can I be better? And then the final question, question 6 in your textbook, is, what strategic issues and problems need attention? And you're going to have to find a way to balance your time to decide how much effort do you focus on solution seeking and creating strategic issues that will make you profitable, and how much time are you going to be spending on focusing on problems. So that's a snapshot of what chapter 4 is. So for the next steps, you know the drill. I want you to read chapter 4 and use the supporting PowerPoints. And you will see again that I have begun to, I think since module 3 in chapter 3, is begun to put notes into your Blackboard slides that I put together for you. You can write over these notes, you can add to these notes, but I was putting key points down as I went through and created the the PowerPoints, to kind of aid you in reading the chapter. And then again, you will answer discussion board 6 and 7, and you must answer each discussion board form this week. And it says to engage in at least 2 postings. So what I want to point out is, these minimum requirements, you can gauge in one posting for discussion board 6 and another one posting for discussion board 7. You might put 2 or 3 postings in only discussion board 6 and not 7. So there's some flexibility in my rules here in the guidelines, but I'm looking for engagement in these discussion boards, because we're not commuting to class, we're not in class for several hours together. So just again, as a reminder, you want to have your chapters read, these lecture recordings reviewed by Sunday or by Monday, so that you can engage in your postings by Wednesday and in a threaded discussion over the next several days. And then again, I've already talked to you about signing up for the mini case study form, where your actual presentations will be the week of 1012 and 1018. And I forgot to remind you, it's in your syllabus, but we also have this week, tomorrow, which is Tuesday, a optional synchronous review session at 7 p.m. in Blackboard Collaborative. So that's live time, you and me together, and I will be there to answer any questions you have about the content of the course here, the objectives, your assignments, so on and so forth. And then finally, my next week's scenes is Module 5, the 5 generic strategies. This is a relatively short chapter, but typically every organization is operating with one of these 5 generic strategies or an adaptation of them. So that's what is meant by assessing the current strategy, and if that current strategy needs to be continue or to be modified. And then for Module 5, you'll have your discussion board 8 and 9. It'll kind of be a light week on reading and discussion board. And I will catch any of you online through the collaborative session tomorrow evening, and have a great week.